Hello, and welcome to another homework help video. This video looks at finding the equilibrium price and quantity in a supply and demand model using linear equations to represent supply and demand for a good. Before looking at a typical problem statement, let's look at a few concepts related to supply and demand, including the definitions of supply, demand, market equilibrium, and different ways to represent supply and demand as equations. The supply of a good is a group of quantities of a good that firms are willing and able to sell at different prices. The demand for a good is a group of quantities of a good that consumers are willing and able to purchase at different prices. Market equilibrium is where the quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded. The price associated with the two quantities is the equilibrium price. Typically, supply and demand appear on a graph as straight lines or sometimes as curves. The point where the two curves cross each other is where the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded are in equilibrium and, therefore, is the equilibrium point. The equilibrium price is read off the vertical, or price, axis, and the equilibrium quantity is read off the horizontal, or quantity, axis. Generally, supply and demand appear as lines on a graph in introductory economics courses. However, they may appear as linear or nonlinear equations, with the equilibrium price and quantity found using algebra. The equations representing supply and demand may appear in various forms. They may appear in y-intercept form like the two equations on the upper left, corresponding to how they are graphed. The equations may appear in x-intercept form, like the second set of equations on the lower left. The x-intercept form of the equation is probably the most frequently used because economists believe the price of a good determines the quantity supplied or demanded. The equations could be mixed formats like the set of the upper right. Finally, sometimes instructors will put the equations in standard form, like those on the lower right. The standard form is helpful for finding the equilibrium price and quantity using either matrix algebra, a computer program like Excel, or a programming language like Python or R. Now, let's look at an example where the equations for supply and demand are in y-intercept form, which is how the equations appear on a graph. The supply of calculators is P subscript S equals 2 times Q subscript S plus 5, and the demand for calculators is P subscript D equals minus 2 times Q plus 25. Find the equilibrium quantity and price for the market for calculators. Next, let's look at a strategy for finding the equilibrium price and quantity using the substitution method. Let's use the strategy of following the economic interpretation of market equilibrium, where the price of the quantity supplied equals the price of the quantity demanded. 1. Write the equilibrium equation in terms of price. P subscript S equals P subscript D. 2. Substitute the equation representing the supply for the good in terms of price. 3. Substitute the equation representing the demand for the good in terms of price. 4. Solve for the equilibrium quantity. 5. Calculate the remaining variable using either the equation representing supply or the one representing demand. Now, let's find the equilibrium quantity and price using the problem statement. First, write the equilibrium equation in terms of price. P subscript S equals P subscript D. Second, substitute the equation representing the supply for the good in terms of price. In the problem statement, the supply equation is 2 times Q subscript S plus 5. So, let S substitute it into the equation for P subscript S. The subscript on the quantity variable is dropped because it now represents the equilibrium quantity. The expression becomes 2 times Q plus 5 equals P subscript D. Third, substitute the equation representing the demand for the good in terms of price. In the problem statement, the demand equation is minus 2 times Q subscript D plus 25. So, let us substitute it into the equation for P subscript D. The subscript on the quantity variable is dropped because it now represents the equilibrium quantity. The expression becomes 2 times q plus 5 equals minus 2 times q plus 25. Fourth, solve for the remaining variable. In this example, the remaining variable is q. So, let's solve the equation for q. Let's start by subtracting 5 from both sides of the equal sign. Subtracting 5 from the left of the equal sign leaves 0, and subtracting 5 from 25 on the right side of the equal sign leaves 20. So, the equation becomes 2 times q equals negative 2 times q plus 20. Next, add 2q to both sides of the equal sign. Adding 2q to the left of the equal sign is 4q, and adding 2 times q to the right side of the equal sign is 0 times q, or just 0. Since 0 doesn't add any to the 20, let's just omit it. Finally, let's divide both sides of the equal sign by 4. On the left side of the equal sign, let's divide 4 times q by 4, giving 1q or just q. On the right side of the equal sign, dividing 20 by 4 is 5. So, the equilibrium quantity is 5 calculators. Fifth, calculate the remaining variable using either the equation representing supply or the one representing demand. In this video, let's calculate the equilibrium price using both the supply and demand equations. In this example, the remaining unknown variable is price, P. Let us start with the supply equation. P subscript S equals 2 times q plus 5. Substituting 5 for q into the supply equation, the expression becomes P subscript S equals 2 times 5 plus 5. Next, multiplying 2 times 5 is 10. So, the expression becomes P subscript S equals 10 plus 5. Next, add 10 to 5, and the expression becomes P subscript S equals 15. So, the equilibrium price calculated using the supply equation is 15. Now, let's find the equilibrium price using the demand equation. The demand equation is P subscript D equals negative 2 times Q subscript D plus 25. Let's substitute 5 into the demand equation for Q, and the expression becomes P subscript D equals negative 2 times 5 plus 25. Next, multiply negative 2 times 5. The expression becomes P subscript D equals negative 10 plus 25. Next, let's add negative 10 to 25. P subscript D equals 15. So, the demand equation equilibrium price is 15. Notice that the equilibrium price is the same whether it was calculated using the supply or demand equation. So, using either the demand equation or the supply will give the same value for the equilibrium price. This homework help video looked at finding the equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price using equations for supply and demand. The video looked at representing supply and demand using equations. While the equations used in the video were linear, nonlinear equations would represent NT supply and demand equally well. The video reviewed a typical problem statement and a strategy for answering it. The problem statement contained a pair of equations in y-intercept form, so the substitution method of solving the equations was selected. Finally, the video looked at applying the strategy to the problem statement. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please put them in the comment section below. If you have ideas for a homework help video, please put them in the comment section below. Also, here are 2 related videos. If you want to try a similar problem, there is a link to one in the video's description. Until the next video, good luck with your economic studies.